Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming to you from Nashville, Tennessee. And for today's episode, I'm going to give you a little bit of my personal account of the big 72 Seasons tour as Metallica made their stop here in Music City, USA. Now, despite the fact that at this point in time I'm not really the world's biggest Metallica fan, this was a tour, or at least these were tour dates that when they were announced last year, I was very excited about for a couple of reasons, really. One being that my niece Emma, who lives out in California, is arguably one of the world's biggest Metallica fans, and for a few years now, my wife and I have been sort of looking for an excuse to invite my niece Emma out here to hang out with us for a few days. And when I was back home last September, her and I, of course, got onto the topic of Metallica, at which point in time I sort of proposed to her that she planned on coming out here to Nashville in May, and I would take her to go see the big Metallica show at Nissan Stadium. Of course, she absolutely leapt at the opportunity. Now, the other reason why I was sort of excited to go see these shows was, despite the fact, as I just mentioned a second ago, that I'm not really the world's biggest Metallica fan. In fact, I would make the argument that I'm very much not a metal guy, but at a certain point in time, back in middle school, I was 13 or 14 years old. Metallica were one of my favorite bands of all time. I mean, to me, these guys could do no wrong. They literally walked on water. Now, at a certain point in time, my musical interest sort of pivoted. And when that happened, I sort of left Metallica and a lot of that style of music in my rearview mirror. But in here somewhere, in this vessel, that young kid still exists, and his name is Mullet Jamie, and I thought it would be very gratifying to take Mullet Jamie to go see one of his favorite bands of all time. Now, my niece Emma arrived here in Nashville on Friday. Now, one cool thing that Metallica is doing on this 72 Seasons tour is they are playing 2 nights in each city. They are playing 2 different set lists with no repeats, and each show has 2 different sets of opening bands. Now, the first show was on Thursday night, as I just mentioned a second ago. My niece Emma didn't arrive here until Friday, so this was a show that we ended up missing. Now, the first night of the shows here in Nashville, the opening bands were Suicidal Tendencies, a band that I've seen a couple times over the years, a band that at one point in time I was a huge fan of. Going back to my late teens and early 20s, this was a band that I was a huge fan of. Now, at a certain point in time, this was a band that, I don't know what happened. I don't want to say I outgrew because that sounds very dismissive, but this was a band that I just sort of moved on from at a certain point in time. I sort of had the same experience when it comes to bands like the Misfits and Social Distortion. Those were both bands also that I loved. I saw Social Distortion live a million times over the years. I've been a pretty big Danzig fan for many years, but when it came to the Misfits and Social Distortion and Suicidal Tendencies, those were all bands that at a certain point in time, I don't know, they just sort of didn't do as much for me. Now, as I mentioned before, I'd seen Suicidal Tendencies live a few times over the years. Actually, the last time my wife and I saw them was not too long ago out here in Tennessee. They performed at the Muddy Roots Music Festival in Cookeville, and they were good. I mean, it's not a dig against them. It was just a band that at one point in time I really loved, and now they don't do as much for me. Now, the second band on Thursday was Pantera, or at least what passes as Pantera in 2025. Now, Pantera is a band that, again, despite the fact that I'm not really the biggest metal guy in the world, Pantera is a band that I like enough. I definitely think that they have some solid jingleage in their catalog. This is a band that I still listen to sometimes on my workout playlist. Now, I know what you're going to say. Looking at you, Jamie, if Pantera's on your workout playlist, I'd say you don't listen to them very much, son. Been busy lately, okay? God, give me a break, why don't ya? But Pantera was a band that I did see live one time, a long time ago, back in either 2000 or the beginning of 2001. It was very much near the end of the band's first run. Now, this was a band that when I saw them live the first time, I thought that they were okay. I mean, at this point in time, it was pretty well documented that the band were not necessarily firing on all cylinders, but I thought that they were sort of passable. It was a band that I had an ex-girlfriend at the time who loved them. She was a big metalhead. Pantera were one of her favorite bands, so we went to go see them in Seattle, and at the end of the day, I thought that the show was passable. Of course, that she thought that it was 100% Jug certified. The one thing I will say about seeing Pantera live, at least back in either 2000 or 2001, was that was probably the most violent show that I've ever been to in my entire life. Now, good, bad, or indifferent, I'm not even making a judgment call on that. I'm just saying that that was a show, no matter where you were in the venue. Now, the venue was a place called Mercer Arena in Seattle, which was not the NBA arena, but it was sort of the smaller arena on the same property. I mean, it was a big venue, but man, you could not go anywhere in that room without getting your ass kicked. I mean, I spent most of the show just trying to find a place where I could just watch the show without having elbows chucked into my eardrums, because I'm not necessarily the world's biggest Pantera fan. You understand? It's not really worth it. To me, now, this current incarnation of Pantera, of course, is made up of Phil Anselmo and Rex Brown from Pantera, along with Zakk Wylde from Ozzy Osbourne and Black Label Society, a band that I don't understand at all. If you're a fan of Black Label Society, you have to explain it to me, because I don't really get it. And Charlie Benante from Anthrax on drums, another band, Anthrax, that, man, I really just do not get. Now, it's funny, when this sort of current incarnation of Pantera was launched a couple of years ago, they made this whole big sort of announcement, of course, and as a part of the announcement, there was this hype that came out where the band basically announced that this was for the brothers, for the legacy, for the fans, and okay, but really at the end of the day, at least in my opinion, this was probably one of the world's most obvious cash grabs. Now, I'm not even judging. Not even a judgment call on that. I mean, this is the music business, after all, and if you have a brand that people are interested in, if you have a product that people are still passionate about, and you can sell it, I'm not here to knock it. The one thing I would ask is just be honest about it. I absolutely hate ingenuineness, even in a world that is ingenuine as the music industry can be. Just be honest. This is a cash grab. Phil Anselmo does not care about the fans at all. Neither does Rex Brown and Zakk Wylde and Charlie Benante. As far as I'm concerned, are probably just cashing a check, son. But anyway, my niece Emma arrived here on Friday afternoon. So Saturday, her and I headed downtown to get our Metallica day started. Now, my niece Emma, one of the things that she was interested in doing while she was in town was checking out the local record stores. I mean, you got to twist my arm in order to get me to do that. But she is a big fan of collecting CDs. And there were a few CDs that she had in her mind, things she wanted to pick up. Now, she lives in a very rural area up in Northern California. I'm not exactly sure what the record store scene is in her area, but one nice thing about living in Nashville, of course, because this is such a big music town, is we are pretty spoiled with the quality of record stores that we have here. And for me, the Top Dog is a place that I would recommend anybody who is visiting Nashville check out, especially if you're a fan of music and physical media. That is a place called Phonolux. That is my number one stop whenever I am heading into record buying mode. And I took my niece Emma to Phonolux, and she absolutely loved it. She was able to find a few nuggets of Metallica goodness, including a Japanese import of the album And Justice for All. I think that was pretty much the highlight of her Phonolux experience. For me, I was able to pick up a copy of the new Billy Idol record, which I will be reviewing on this channel probably this weekend, so just keep that in mind, son. After we left Phonolux, my niece Emma and I had to head downtown, because one cool thing that Metallica does as they tour nowadays, and this was something that I was sort of ignorant about, but every city that they hit, one thing that they do is they rent out a vacant storefront, and they open up their own sort of pop-up store. Now, my niece Emma told me that she had just seen the band up in Seattle not too long ago, and she was the one that sort of explained to me the concept of these pop-up stores. So, of course, we had to go find the pop-up store here in Nashville, which we did. And my niece Emma was telling me that at the show in Seattle, when she got to the pop-up store, she had to wait in line for a couple of hours just to get in the door. Now, we were fortunate enough in the sense that we got downtown pretty early. We got to the pop-up store not too long, I think, after it opened, and we were able to sort of get right in without any waiting in line. And I got to tell you that this place was something like I've never seen before. It was roughly the size of sort of a convenience store, maybe a small sort of 7-Eleven, but the place was just jam-packed with Metallica merch and tons of fans in there just having the greatest time of their lives. I mean, that's one thing about Metallica that you got to give the fans credit for. They are absolutely devout. I've said the same thing on this channel many times when it comes to my main dog, Mr. Stephen Patrick Morrissey, that his fans are among some of the most devout in the music world. But I got to tell you, seeing the duckage that was being thrown around in this Metallica pop-up store, I will give Metallica fans all the credit in the world. My niece left there. I don't even know how much business she did at the Metallica pop-up store at a certain point in time. Now, keep in mind, I'm not somebody that's afraid to throw some coinage around, but at a certain point in time, she was making a purchase that was making me a little bit uncomfortable. So I had to sort of step away from the situation. Now, keep in mind, my niece Emma works. She still lives at home. She's got disposable income. This is her life. This is her passion, man. Metallica. These guys only come around every so often. So she definitely threw around some change, if you know what I mean. But at the end of the day, I thought that the pop-up store idea, the concept, was something that was really cool. I definitely felt a sort of connection to Mullet Jamie. I can imagine Mullet Jamie at the age of 13 or 14 walking into this Metallica Superstore and just gushing. After we left the Metallica Superstore, we made a couple other stops around Nashville in search of more physically formatted music. At a certain point in time, though, I was starting to worry about parking because I'm an old man and I worry about parking. I worry about cheap parking more than anything else, and that's one thing that is very difficult to find here in Nashville. So we were getting pretty close to when the gates would be opening at the, I think it's called Nissan Stadium, Titan Stadium, wherever it is, the NFL Stadium here in Nashville. So my niece Emma and I found parking. And one thing I wanted to do with her before we headed over to the actual stadium itself, because this is Nashville and this is something that you have to do. Not that I thought she was going to enjoy herself doing it, mind you, but you have to do it. You have to see Broadway. So we parked in a neighborhood that is called the Gulch, which is sort of on the other side of downtown from where the NFL Stadium is here, and I had to walk her through Broadway. Now, just watching her reaction to Broadway, as I mentioned before, she lives in a very rural area. I get the sense that she's sort of a small town gal, and walking through the utter chaos that is Broadway was something that I found to be somewhat enjoyable, at least experiencing it through her eyes. My wife and I have lived in Nashville for 5 years now. I've been coming to Nashville since probably 2003, so Broadway for me is sort of old hat, but it's kind of fun to experience it with somebody that's never been there before. But at a certain point in time, we crossed the bridge, and it's time to head over to the show. And one thing I noticed when we got over the pedestrian bridge and onto the Titan Stadium property was the first thing you see, of course, as if the pop-up store wasn't quite enough for Metallica. I mean, these guys are pros when it comes to making money, man. And that's not even a dig. I don't even care. This is the music business, after all. This is not a hobby. But the first thing I noticed was a tractor trailer that they were using as their merch table outside the stadium. Now, keep in mind, inside the stadium, there were still merch tables. I mean, this band was pimping their goods at every opportunity. So, of course, my niece Emma, as if she had not dropped enough coinage at the pop-up store, she got in line and she picked up a couple other necessities before we headed into the stadium. Now, at a certain point in time, we walked into Titan Stadium, and I realized as we got there that I had never been to Titan Stadium before. I'm not a football guy. Now, I realize you're not supposed to say that in the South. You can't say you don't like football, Jim. That's sort of people's identity down here. Whenever I tell people that I moved here from Oakland, they're always like, oh, you must be a Raiders fan, huh? It's like, why? Why does that have to be your identity? But I will say, having never been to Titan Stadium, the place seems nice enough. Now, right next door to it, they are currently building another abomination, another cathedral to sports, because apparently the Titan Stadium that we have here now is no longer up to snuff. Now, at a certain point in time during this evening, I sort of realized why the current Titan Stadium is sort of outdated, although I thought it was relatively nice. At a certain point in time, of course, we ended up finding our seats. We were sort of up in the upper level, and I thought that our seats were pretty good. Now, I'm not really a big stadium rock guy. I'm not an expert in this particular field, but I will say that we got up there, and of course, the first thing I notice is the stage setup, the production, and I thought that the stage looked pretty cool. My niece Emma was sort of explaining to me the minute details of the stadium, where the snake pit was and what this meant and what that meant. And she was very knowledgeable on the situation, much more knowledgeable than I am. I know, how could you imagine that, right? But anyway, at a certain point in time, the show begins. It was about 6:30, 7 o'clock, I think, when the first band came out. A band that, up until very recently, a band that I had never heard of, certainly never heard. This was a band that my niece Emma had seen open for Metallica when she went to the show up in Seattle, and she was sort of snickering to me about this band because despite the fact that my niece Emma is only 20 years old, she thought that they were just about as juvenile as they possibly could be. She was very curious as to what I was going to think of this band, but this band turned out being a band called Ice Nine Kills. Now, musically, stylistically, to me, this band, I don't know, they weren't really my luggage. They basically sounded like every screamo deathcore band that I've ever heard. It is just a genre of music that I'm not a big fan of, a genre of music I don't know anything about. Now, the one thing that sort of struck me about this band was their physical appearance. They came out on stage and they were all wearing suits and ties, and they all had their hair combed. There wasn't one little hair out of place, and I thought that that was sort of an interesting gimmick. Now, at first, I didn't really understand what the meaning of the gimmick was, but it became relatively obvious in a short period of time that these guys were sort of supposed to be playing the character of Patrick Bateman in American Psycho, one of my favorite movies of all time, a movie that I never get tired of. And I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. That's sort of interesting. But as the band played throughout the entire set, throughout their entire show, there were different, I should say, sort of horror melodramas that were being played out. And at a certain point in time, I sort of grew tired of the whole thing. Now, I'll give credit where credit is due. If I were much younger, I probably would have thought that this was hyper snug. I mean, I'm a huge horror movie fan. I realize that I'm not the demographic that they are going for. They are certainly trying to play to this sort of hot topic crowd. Now, if I sort of had to describe what this band was to me, imagine the Spirit Halloween store if it was a band. That's sort of what it reminded me of. And at a certain point in time, once the sort of horror gimmick got old to me, I remember sort of thinking to myself, like, is this real? Is this a real band, or is this just sort of like a thing? Is this like performance art? I don't really know. I read a quote one time recently that sort of stuck with me, and it sort of made me think of this. It made me think of this quote as I was watching the show. The quote reads, I'm not going to probably get it right verbatim, but it's sort of, I'll paraphrase it, saying that the quote said, basically today, in the world that we live in, everything is pro wrestling. Politics are pro wrestling, music is pro wrestling, entertainment is pro wrestling, social media is pro wrestling, sports are pro wrestling. And I remember thinking about that quote as I was watching the band. I was like, is this real? This feels sort of like a put on. Now, at a certain point in time, I became convinced. Now, I'm not clairvoyant, mind you, but I became convinced as this whole horror show was going on. Now, during every song, different villains would come out and they would kill other people, and they, and this whole play was going on. At a certain point in time, I became convinced. Now, I don't know why I became convinced of this, but I became convinced that at a certain point in time, we were going to see Art the Clown. And sure enough, towards the end of the show, who should make an appearance but Art the Clown. Now, my niece had to explain to me later on, because my niece works at Spencer's, and she had to explain to me later on that, yes, this band Ice Nine Kills has done a collaboration with Damien Leone and the Terrifier people, and they have this whole, they have this whole collection of merch that they've mutually released. Now, keep in mind, I'm a big horror movie fan. I'm actually a pretty big Terrifier fan. I realize that makes me a trendy chud. But I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, this Terrifier thing, it sort of started off as kind of a cool, independent thing, and now it's just become this Hot Topic, overexposed mall, thing. And I remember my wife and I went to go see Terrifier 3 in the theater when it first came out, and I mean, even the quality of Terrifier 3 has gone down tremendously from the first two, at least in my opinion. So I thought to myself, okay, this guy Damien Leone, he needs to concentrate more on his product than he does overexposing it. But at the end of the day, I will say that Ice Nine Kills were definitely not the worst thing I've ever seen. Like I said, if I were 19, 20 years old, still Hot Topic Jim, I probably thought that it was, enjoyable. I mean, the best thing I can say about this band musically is that they were pretty much unforgettable. They were not anything that left any permanent scarring. And about 20 minutes after they played, I'd completely forgotten who they were. And at this point in time, I have no interest in their music and no ill will against the experience of seeing them live. That being said, the second opening band on Saturday night was a band that I will say may have left a little bit of permanent scarring. Now, unfortunately, this was a band that I had definitely heard of. In fact, this is a band that when I hear their name, I sort of immediately revert back to a very specific period of time. A time that, for me at least, was a very dark period in the history of music. Now, this is a band that I totally do not understand. This is an entire genre of music that I absolutely don't get. That is the whole nu metal thing. I am not even a fan of traditional metal. This whole nu metal thing, when it was popular, it was beyond me. And now the fact that it's kind of come back is something that I absolutely cannot believe. But it was just that nu metal genre, bands like Korn, Slipknot, Linkin Park, Mudvayne, Flaw, Coal Chamber, System of a Down, Rob Zombie. Now, I know what you're going to say. How dare you lump in Rob Zombie with all of those bands, Jim? Well, I'll tell you this right now. Rob Zombie stinks. His music stinks. His movies stink. The whole thing stinks. Get the hell out of here with Rob Zombie. But the lowest of the low, at least in my opinion, was possibly the band Limp Bizkit. Now, up until Saturday, I had gone my whole life without having to tell people that I had seen Limp Bizkit live, and those days are over. It can never happen again. I feel as if I've earned a Purple Heart. I feel as if now I have a valid reason to go in to therapy. Now, if you think Fred Durst is a little bit of a dullard, I would highly recommend that you check out his fans. I mean, if you ever need a self-esteem boost, go surround yourself with a gaggle of Limp Bizkit fans. You will suddenly feel as if you are a Rhodes Scholar. When my niece Emma and I were in the merch line at the stadium, in line to go buy merch, from the back of this tractor trailer, there was a guy wearing a Limp Bizkit shirt, and the shirt across the front of it said Loserville. And I thought to myself, well, at least that's honest. Limp Bizkit, to me, if for some reason you were unfamiliar with Limp Bizkit, I envy you, my friend. But Limp Bizkit, to me, if ESPN was a band, it would sound like Limp Bizkit. In fact, if I were a betting man, I would pretty much guarantee that dick with ears, Pat McAfee, probably loves Limp Bizkit. I mean, the Limp Bizkit, what they basically do is they sort of represent everything that is embarrassing that white people are capable of. And the recipe is really pretty simple. All you do is you combine the worst elements with metal and the worst elements with hip-hop, and you combine it into this just unlistenable sludge. Limp Bizkit is metal for people that don't like metal, and it's hip-hop for guys that don't like black people. Now, I will say this as a sort of compliment to Limp Bizkit. That being, if I had to take one sort of positive thing away from seeing Limp Bizkit live, yes, I've seen Limp Bizkit live. I will say this. I am a man who I sort of roam this world alone. I am sort of a ship without a port, as people say. I am an observer, and as I look out there in the world, I oftentimes find it confusing. I am somebody that doesn't really have a lot of friends. I'm somebody that isn't really looking for a lot of friends. But I will say, having seen Limp Bizkit live and watching 30,000 people literally lose their minds over it, it did help me sort of understand the world that we live in a little bit better. So at least in that sense, I am eternally grateful to Fred Durst and his band. I mean, this made sense of a lot of the things that I've been confused about throughout my entire life. Now, the only real positive thing you can say about the whole Limp Bizkit experience live was that it ended. And it was not the last music I ever heard. Now, I remember sitting there thinking, like, if I die right now, and this is the last music I ever hear, I'm going to be pretty pissed. Now, keep in mind, I embrace death. I'm waiting for it, as a matter of fact. But if this is the last music I ever hear, I'm not going to be a very happy corpse, son! Anyway, the band finishes. At the end of the day, I'm really no worse for wear. Now my eardrums are in here going, what the hell was that, Joe? But anyway, they start cleaning off the stage. Now, keep in mind, all day Saturday, the weather out here in Nashville was just the pits. Now, I realize that going on YouTube and having weather chat isn't necessarily the most enticing conversation of all time, but it was the whole day. The weather in Nashville was just the pits. But once the show started, during the Ice Nine Kills and Limp Bizkit shows, the weather was actually quite lovely. But over here, off to our right a little bit, my niece Emma and I were sitting on the side of the stadium that is on the other side of downtown. You could sort of see these clouds coming in, and it looked pretty ominous. It felt as if they were rolling in with the Jaws theme, like dee-dee, dee-dee. You knew it was going to be bad. And there was this lady who was sitting next to me, and she kept checking the weather app, and she was explaining to me that this was the first time that she was ever going to see Metallica. She was sort of roughly my age, and basically she was explaining to me that she had been waiting for this night her whole life, and she just could not wait for them to take the stage, but she was afraid that these clouds over here were going to wreak havoc. Now, as they were sort of clearing off the stage after Limp Bizkit and getting it prepared for Metallica, I'm sort of convinced at this point in time that the gods decided that that stage, after the abortion that Fred Durst and his chums had just performed, that stage needed to be cleansed, because at a certain point in time, these clouds arrive, and suddenly it's announced over the PA system that we are expecting some very severe weather, and everybody has to evacuate the seating area and move down into the concourse, which we did. Now, this was not a very fun experience for anybody that is prone to claustrophobia. I know for me, it was not necessarily the happiest hour of my life, although I will say, as soon as we got out of the seating area and into the concourse, I mean, it unleashed unholy hell out in the seating area. So despite the fact that my niece and I were crammed into this concourse in a way that I literally felt like I was in a disaster movie, I thought to myself, man, if something bad happens now, we're dead. We're going to get trampled. This is awful. But I was grateful, at least in the sense that we weren't out there in that weather, because it just absolutely went off. That's one thing about the weather out here in Tennessee. And again, I realize that weather chat stinks, and it always has stunk. But I mean, the weather out here in Tennessee, it can change on nothing. And when it decides to really cut loose out here, it goes off. And it absolutely did. So despite the fact that my niece Emma and I were crammed into this concourse, with a bunch of other people that were probably as equally miserable as we are, I was very grateful that we weren't out in the weather. Now, after about, I would say, half hour to 45 minutes, the weather sort of cleared up, and they gave everybody the all clear to head back into the seating area, at which point in time, Metallica must have been chomping at the bit, because about 10 minutes or so after they gave us the all clear to head back into the seating area, in fact, I would make the argument that a lot of people were still sort of filing back into the seating area, Metallica took the stage, and I gotta be honest with you, man, I really didn't know how I was going to react when Metallica took the stage, because as I mentioned before, this was a band that when I was in middle school, I was absolutely obsessed with, but a band that for most of my adult life, I sort of have not really paid that much attention to. But when Metallica came out on stage, honestly, man, I got a little bit emo, I'm not going to lie to you, for a couple reasons, I think, really. One, because I look over at my niece Emma, who's sitting on my left, and she is just beaming. Now, keep in mind, when we were down in the concourse during the weather delay, she was having a panic attack, man. She really thought that this show was going to get canceled. Now, I wasn't necessarily afraid that the show was going to get canceled, because I had read that last year when Taylor Swift did her 3-night mini residency at this same stadium, there was one night when she experienced a 3-hour weather delay, and she came out and she still played the whole show. So I wasn't necessarily afraid of the show getting canceled. I was just afraid of how long the weather was going to sit. Now, earlier I mentioned that they're building this whole new abomination next door to the current Titan Stadium. And I mentioned, I sort of realized why they're building the new one and why the current one is sort of outdated. Because apparently, as we were in the concourse talking to some other fellow Metallica fans, they were explaining to us that the new stadium is going to have a roof on it, and this will no longer be an issue. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that sort of makes sense. I still don't think you need a $3 billion football stadium, but that's just my opinion. I don't think we need these cathedrals to sports, you understand? But I look over at my niece Emma as Metallica come out on stage, and she is just beaming. I mean, ear to ear. This was her second time seeing Metallica, and just for that second, just for that moment in time, I got to sort of live vicariously through her, because at this stage in my life, I'm an old, chewed up piece of gristle. I've been to a million shows, and I always think to myself, I've seen better. But for her, this was a life-altering experience. The other reason why I sort of got a little bit emo when Metallica came out on the stage was somewhere in here, I could feel little Mullet Jamie smile. Now, Mullet Jamie was a kid that grew up in a toxic house. He was abused. He was unloved. He had to go to a school where he basically had no friends. The kid didn't have a lot of reasons in life to smile. And for that minute, that second, when Metallica first walked out on stage, I could feel him in there. And he had the horns up, and he was just beaming. And for me, honestly, man, I got a little bit misty. I'm not going to lie to you. Now, I realize you're going to say, hey, Jim, there's no crying in metal. I'm not a metal guy. I can cry if I want to. I didn't cry, okay? I'm not going to cry in public. Give me a break, man. But little Mullet Jamie, man, he was in there. I could feel it. He was just on top of the world. Anyway, Metallica came out, and honestly, man, I'm pretty impressed by the show that they put out. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm not really the world's biggest stadium rock guy. It isn't necessarily my genre. It's not something I'm an expert in. I think I've only been to maybe one other big stadium rock show in my entire life, but I thought that the Metallica stage set, the production was all cool. I thought the band sounded great. Now, the one sort of knock on Metallica I've heard, and I don't necessarily agree with making this dig, is that people say that James Hetfield can't sing anymore. I heard the same thing when my wife and I went to go see the Kiss End of the Road tour a couple years ago here in Nashville. Everybody said, oh, Paul Stanley can't sing anymore. He stinks. He always does. But no. I thought Paul Stanley sounded okay when he came to Nashville for the End of the Road tour. Yes, the guy's been doing it for 50 years. His voice is not going to sound the same as it did in 1975. The same thing can be said about James Hetfield. He's not going to sound the same way he did on Ride the Lightning 40 years into his career. But I thought that the band sounded great. The first song that they played was a song called Whiplash off of the band's first album, Kill 'Em All. Now, I'm going to say this, and as I say this, I recognize that I'm an old codge. I'm just a geezer, but my knowledge of Metallica really is only of the first 5 albums. And I'm not a purist. I'm not saying it all stinks after that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that those were the albums that I was familiar with. And at a certain point in time, as I mentioned before, my interest in Metallica sort of waned and I moved on with my life. But that being said, Kill 'Em All, of the 5 albums that I am familiar with, if I had to rank the 5 albums of Metallica's that I'm aware of, Kill 'Em All is probably my least favorite. Not to say that it's not a good album, because it is. It's got a lot of great songs on it. But for me, it's a little bit too thrashy. Now, I realize that sounds stupid. I'm a stupid person. And I realize that, yes, they're a thrash band, Jim. That's why it sounds thrashy. But to me, Kill 'Em All was always a record that was just a little bit too much. I'm sorry, it was just a little bit too much for me. Still is. Still not a record that I go back and listen to. I mentioned earlier that I listened to Pantera on my workout playlist. There's Metallica stuff that I listen to on my workout playlist as well. In fact, I think this song Whiplash is a song that, despite the fact that Kill 'Em All is not really my favorite Metallica album, I do like the song Whiplash. I always say it's cool, when a band starts off a show with an upbeat ass kicker. I thought that was a good choice. In fact, I remember Saturday morning, I should go back and say Saturday morning, as my niece Emma and I were driving downtown, I asked her, because this is sort of something that I have to do, especially when it comes to bands that are my ultimate favorites. I've said this before. Whenever I go see Morrissey, I always have to go into it as blind as possible. I don't want to go on social media. I don't want to read set lists. I don't want to know anything that's going on. I don't want to go on YouTube. I want to be as ignorant and blind as possible, because to me, that's the fun of it. And I was talking about that concept with my niece Emma as we were driving into town on Saturday. And since the band had played Thursday, I asked her, I said, hey, did you check the set list on Thursday? Do you do that, or do you like to go in blind? And she told me that she couldn't help herself. She had to check the set list on Thursday just so she at least knew what she wasn't going to be hearing on Saturday, because, like I said before, one of the cool things about this Metallica tour is they're doing 2 nights in each city, 2 different set lists, no repeats. So she sort of knew at least what she wasn't going to be hearing. Now, one thing that sort of bummed her out about the set list that they had played on Thursday was her all-time favorite song, she told me, is the song Sad But True, which they played Thursday night. So she knew that we were not going to be hearing that song on Saturday, so she's a little bummed out about that. But there was plenty of stuff for them to, play on Saturday that she was going to love. The second song that they played on Saturday night was For Whom the Bell Tolls off of Ride the Lightning. Now, if I had to rank the 5 Metallica albums that I am familiar with, Ride the Lightning is easily my favorite. It always was. Little mullet Jim, man, he loved Ride the Lightning. For Whom the Bell Tolls was awesome live. Again, it was another one of those songs because of what this band meant to me at a very sort of important time in my life as a young kid. I got a little bit emo when they played For Whom the Bell Tolls. The production during that song, the stage production, was cool. They had these they had 8 huge towers that were sort of around the perimeter of the stage, and on each tower they had these screens, and on For Whom the Bell Tolls, when that song started off, they had this huge bell that rang, and it was just really cool. Again, I thought the stage production was really cool. I thought that the center of the stage was sort of donut shaped, and then in the center of the stage there were fans, which they call the snake pit. Now, my niece Emma and I were up in the seating area, but she told me that it is her goal someday. It is her, her ambition in life to one day be in the snake pit, and I can only imagine, if I were a young Metallica fan, that is sort of the Holy Land. But I thought the stage production was really cool. After that, they played the title track from the album Ride the Lightning. That was one cool thing about this show, at least as far as I was concerned, was I thought that they hit Ride the Lightning really hard, and like I said before, that was my favorite album, is still my all-time favorite Metallica album. I thought Ride the Lightning was awesome live too. After that, they played a song off of Reload, a song called The Memory Remains. Now, again, anything for me past the Black Album, I'm not really super familiar with. This was a song that I don't know that I'd ever really heard before, so Seeing it live didn't really mean a ton to me, but again, I'm not a purist. I'm not going to sit there with my arms crossed in defiance. I'm just going to enjoy the show for what it is. My niece Emma really likes, she likes their whole catalog, of course, but she really likes the last, 2/3 of their career after the Black Album, so she loved that song. After that, they played 2 songs off of the new album, 72 Seasons, which I've heard nothing off of as far as studio versions. I have never listened to that album. I've never even listened to one song off that album. They played Lux Eterna, I think it was called, and they played Too Far Gone. I think for some of the fans that were in the seating area, at least judging by somewhat of an exodus that happened when they started playing these new songs, I think for some Metallica fans, they saw this as a beer and piss break. Which, I don't think that that's necessarily a uncommonality when it comes to seeing legacy bands play new material. I talked about this when I went to go see Morrissey last year. He played 4 new songs off of what is his upcoming new album. One of the songs in particular is a song I've seen live 4 times now. It's a song called, of course, The Telephone Rings, and I'm not a beer and piss break guy, especially when it comes to see Morrissey. I'm not going to leave for anything, but if there were a beer and piss break song for me, it would be for of course, The Telephone Rings off of what's going to be the Bonfire of Teenagers, if it ever comes out. After that, to me, was probably the low point of the show, at least as far as I'm concerned, and this isn't anything against Kirk Hammett or Robert Trujillo, it's just I'm not the solo guy. But Kirk Hammett and Robert Trujillo at this point in time did a bass and guitar sort of solo jam. They call it a doodle, and it was very much a buzzkill as far as I'm concerned. I don't do the whole solo thing. I found it to be somewhat annoying to me. It always sort of puts the brakes on the show. Robert Trujillo was trying to sing something during this sort of guitar and bass solo, and the mic wasn't on, and it just seemed weird. Somebody told me this actually yesterday. I was talking to a client of mine yesterday because he was at the show also, and we were sort of comparing notes. And he told me that he thought they were playing the song Jolene by Dolly Parton. I didn't hear that. I'm also not the world's biggest Dolly Parton expert, but I was like, I could see that. I mean, it's sort of fitting for Nashville, but, to me, I don't like that. I'm not a guitar solo guy. I never have been. I come from more of a punk rock background. That isn't really part of my musical universe. But after that, they played a song that remedied that situation pretty quick, son. That is Fade to Black off of off of Ride the Lightning. Whew. Now, in the spirit of full transparency, I got to tell you that my all-time favorite Metallica song ever is the song Escape, which is on Ride the Lightning. That was my favorite song of Metallica's when I was 13. And it's my favorite Metallica song today. I grew up as a nerd, as an outcast, as a kid that had no friends. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that? I'm sure it's not that difficult. But for me, the song Escape was a song that when I was in middle school, I was convinced was written for me. I thought James Hetfield had heard of Mullet Jamie. He's like, there's this kid out there in Paradise, California, and he needs me to write him some killer lyrics. And the song Escape has always been my favorite Metallica song. Still is. Still is a song that can sort of get you through a rough day. But my second favorite song, because I sort of knew. I mean, I didn't know. But if I were a betting man, I would bet there's no way in hell that they're ever going to play Escape. But my second favorite Metallica song of all time. Second favorite Metallica song when I was 13. Second favorite Metallica song now. Fade to Black, man. Whew. Talk about getting a little misty right around here, right around this region. The rain had stopped in Nashville, but the rain had started right here. Hearing Fade to Black, Mullet Jamie was having a mosh pit in here. I could feel it. He was going absolutely nuts. I could not believe I was sitting there at my relatively advanced age listening to one of my first ever favorite songs. Man. Loved it. Loved every second of it. Now, in the middle of the song, I don't want to say it killed it, because it was a very nice statement that James Hetfield made, and it was very heartfelt, and you could tell that he was being sincere, but he talked about mental health, he talked about suicide, and he did it in a way that was very, I thought, very nice, very articulate, very touching. But part of me, as the 13-year-old kid who was just rocking out, man, I was like, dude, don't stop the song, son. Anyway, Fade to Black to me was the highlight of the show. Oh my God, it was awesome. Again, a song that for me when I was 13 years old was just my life. After that, they played Wherever I May Roam off the Black Album. Now, my niece Emma, of course, I mentioned before that her favorite song of all time is Sad But True off of the Black Album. They played that song the first night, so she knew she wasn't going to get it the second night. But she told me that Wherever I May Roam is probably her second favorite song of all time, so she got a chance to at least hear that. I thought it was awesome. You know, the Black Album for me is fine. I would take it over Kill 'Em All. To me, I would probably make the same argument a lot of diehard Metallica fans make, that it's a little bit too poppy as far as I'm concerned, but there's a lot of stuff on it I like. I like Wherever I May Roam. After that, they played another song that I love off of Ride the Lightning, Call It Cthulhu. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. I'm sure I always mispronounced it. It is the instrumental track off of Ride the Lightning, another song that I loved when I was a kid, and they just nailed it. I always liked Call It Cthulhu. I always liked Orion. I liked the instrumental tracks back in those days, and they just nailed it as far as I was concerned. I thought it sounded note perfect. At the end of the song, I think they do the same thing when they play Orion. At this point in time, I'm not exactly sure, but they dedicated that song, of course, to the memory of Cliff Burton. After that, they played Unforgiven off of the Black Album. Now, for me, Unforgiven is sort of a forgettable song. I thought they played a very good rendition of it, a very true to the original rendition of it. My niece Emma was freaking out. I get the sense, and I don't know this to be a fact, but I get the sense that the Black Album might be her favorite album. I don't know if we actually got to the bottom of that. I kept asking her, and she kept sort of squirming around the question. I tried to nail her down and said, I want the answer! But I think if I were to guess, I would say that the Black Album is probably her favorite album. Unforgiven to me, I don't know. Not necessarily my favorite song. After that, they played another new song off of the album 72 Seasons, a song called Inamorata, and this was a song I actually really liked. Now, I'm not always the big, epic, long song guy. In fact, that usually is sort of not the case. In fact, James Hetfield even introduced this song as a long song, and man, I actually really dug it. I actually had to go back when we got home from the show, and I went on Spotify and I listened to the studio version of this song, which I also really like. As far as the new material that they played, I mean, this was easily my favorite of the newer material they played. Now, of course, for me, anything new is past the Black Album, so new is sort of a relative term, but I actually really liked Inamorata. Like I said, I don't always love, big, long songs. Now, it's not a hardened, steadfast rule. It's not etched in stone. I've said this before. My favorite Kraftwerk song of all time is Autobahn. Of course, that song takes up the first side of the entire LP. Now, my wife and I recently went to go see Kraftwerk here in Nashville at a place called The Pinnacle. And, of course, when they play that song live, they do more the single version of it. So it's the condensed version of Autobahn. But, man, I really like that song. Inamorata. After that, they played Fight Fire with Fire off of Ride the Lightning. Again, I thought that they just really did a good job hitting Ride the Lightning, which is my favorite album of all time. Somebody told me this yesterday. It was the same guy I was talking to about the Jolene thing, because he said he went to both shows. He said that the first night of the tour, which I actually haven't even gone back and checked the set list, so I'm sort of trusting him. So if I'm sounding ignorant right now, blame him, don't blame me. Okay, I'm ignorant enough on my own. But he told me that the first night they played a lot more new material, and he thought that they played a lot of the older material on the second night. So if you're only going to one night, as far as I'm concerned, if that's true, we sort of won, because Ride the Lightning to me is the jugs. After that, they played Moth into Flame, which is an album a song off of the Self-Destruct album. Another album I've never listened to. Never probably even listened to one song off of it. I don't really remember the song Moth into Flame. Sort of seemed a little bit forgettable as far as I'm concerned, but there were people loving it sitting around us, so not going to say that it doesn't have merit. But after that, oh man, the only song that they played off of Injustice for All, now it's an obvious one. I'm an obvious guy. I'm generic Jim Johansson. But they played the song One. And I remember, as I was watching this introduction to the song One, which I love still. Again, I'm generic Jim Johansson. I acknowledge it. I'm not a big metal guy. This took me back to middle school, 13, 14 years old, and what was my every Saturday ritual. I've explained on this channel many times, man. I was raised by MTV. That was my church. And when I was in middle school, there was one show in particular that I would not have missed for anything. It was appointment television, and that was Headbangers Ball. And Ricky Rackman, I think before Ricky Rackman hosted it, I think it was Adam Curry, who was a chud. Ricky Rackman was the man. But when that song One started, that immediately took me back to sitting in my living room on Saturday nights after my parents had skedaddled it off to bed, and I was just plugged in on Headbangers Ball. That was my sanctuary. That was what, that was like my payment for making it through another crappy week at a crappy small town school where nobody liked me. And man, the nights on Headbangers Ball when they would play this song One was the highlight. To me, at that point in time, it was the coolest, greatest music video ever made. It was, of course, famously, even I know this, it was Metallica's first ever music video. It was something that at that point in time sort of alienated their fans a little bit. Not as much as the Black Album eventually would. But I know that back in those days, it was a big thing that Metallica were on MTV because so many of their fans hated it. So many of their fans said they should never be on MTV. They said they would never do it. But if you're going to do it, if you're going to make the plunge onto MTV, you got to make a video as good as One, because that video is still the jugs. And watching him play that song live again, very emotional. That was a moment for me. It was like, oh my God. I think when I first discovered Metallica as a teenage middle school kid, it was either Master of Puppets or Injustice for All that was the current album. I had both. I don't remember which one was the current album. It's possible that Injustice for All came out after my fandom was spawned. But man, the song One, I loved it. After that, the band left the stage for a brief moment. Of course, we'd already suffered through an hour-long weather delay, so there wasn't much of a break between the last song One and then the song that they came out for the encore, which was Enter Sandman. From the Black Album. I was sort of curious. I didn't realize this until after the show. I went on Spotify. Now, I don't know how good of a gauge Spotify is. I always say this. I don't know. But Enter Sandman is their biggest song on Spotify. That's actually, to me, it's actually kind of surprising, because to me, Enter Sandman is, it's okay. I mean, I get that it's a huge song. I mean, I remember when it came out, you couldn't get away from it on the radio, on MTV, anything. I mean, it was just, the whole Black Album was so massive. I was explaining this to my niece Emma, and she doesn't need me to explain anything to her, but I was, because I'm that old guy who pretends like kids don't know what was happening before they were born. But I told her, I was like, man, you have no idea how big that album was. You could not get away from that album for years. I felt like singles and videos for the Black Album came out years after the record came out. And to me, Enter Sandman, the Black Album to me has a lot of good stuff on it, but Enter Sandman to me, But again, it's a big song. It was a crowd pleaser to end the show with. And one cool thing that Metallica does at the end of the show is they do a very nice, long, sort of extended goodbye. They toss out guitar picks. They toss out drumsticks. I think it's something that is a real crowd pleaser. One thing about Metallica I will give them credit for. Now, Metallica, it's a business, man. It's obviously a business. These guys are pros at making money. I think that that's a lot of what their motivation is, and it's a business. At the end of the day, the music business is a business. It's a romantic idea to think that these guys actually care about us as fans. Now, they may or may not, but they're not under any obligation. But I will say that I get the sense that Metallica is a band that, at some level, they do at least care a little bit about their fans. They gave a very nice extended goodbye. They were tossing out guitar picks. They were tossing out drumsticks. Each one of them, at the very end of the night, they came up to the microphone. They said their own sort of personal farewell to the fans. I thought it was a nice touch. My niece Emma was just sitting there just tingling. Of course, she's sad because the show's over. And I know that she is going to go to see both nights, actually coming up soon. She was telling me that she's going with her family, her parents and her brother, to go see Metallica play both nights in, was it Santa Clara? Whatever their football cathedral is out there where the 49ers play. So I told her, I was like, well, at least you get to see both nights. Because she told me that the night that she went to up in Seattle was basically the second night in Seattle also. So she got basically the same set list, although she told me that the only real change of the show that she went to in Seattle was that instead of Limp Bizkit, she saw Five Finger Death Punch, a band that I don't know anything about, but they can't be any worse than Limp Bizkit. But all in all, I thought that Metallica were great. I thought that they sounded great. I thought that their stage production was cool. As I mentioned before, some people will sort of knock James Hetfield that he can't sing anymore. He doesn't sing as well as he did back in 1985, 86, 87, but, I mean, the guy's been doing it for so long, and his style of singing is very intense. I mean, it is not like he's just up there crooning. So I will give them all the credit in the world. It was awesome. My niece Emma and I had a great time. She spent a couple more days out here in Nashville. We got to do some other things, and I delivered her safely home, or at least to the airport. I didn't fly the plane back to California, you understand? But I delivered her back to the airport on Tuesday, and quite frankly, my wife and I already missed the little stink pot. I'll be back home in July, so I will be looking forward to sort of reminiscing with her the memories of her visit out here in Nashville. But if you haven't seen the Metallica tour, and it's coming to your area, if you're somebody like me that is a casual fan, or more accurately, a former fan, check it out. I definitely think it was well worth my time. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store like Phonolux here in Nashville. Now, if you ever do come to Nashville, don't just go to Broadway. Explore the real city. Go check out Phonolux. You will not be disappointed. Sad. Check back most weeks for Morrissey Monday, a celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths, as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And, I mean, I guess unless you've got anything else, I think that's just about going to do her. So until next time, my friends, talk to you then.